So, Lone Rider here, and if you're, of a certain age, you probably remember when these things first appeared in the market. This is the Spyderco, and very iconic blade shape, um, very distinctive, and I mean, for my generation, I think the first appearance this had was first we were introduced to it was in the movie Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone and Janine Turner. Um, One of the characters pulled out one and handed it to another character, and he then used it to save his life from a mercenary. Um, it was shown in the film both being used as a tool and a weapon. Um, in one case, he cut down a stranded parachutist, and again, in another case, it was used by another character as a last-ditch defensive weapon. But that was a much bigger knife, so it makes sense, I guess. That was actually the Spyderco Endura. This is a Spyderco Delica, which is a little bit smaller, and this is probably one of the most common Spyderco knives, and with good reason. Um, in fact, I would argue that if you're not looking at complicated lock designs or um, spring assist opening knives, if you're just looking at simple, basic, no frills locking pocket knives, uh, the Spyderco Delica is probably the best all-around EDC knife that you could have, um, at least that I've ever handled so far. I've handled some much more uh, expensive and nicer knives, and I even own what I would consider nicer knives, but uh, those again don't fit into the category of simple locking one-handed pocket knife. For example, the Spyderco has a simple lock back. It's literally just a piece of metal with a bar spring under it and a pin through it. Um, this the lock itself moves in relation to the side scales and everything, but it itself doesn't have any moving parts. Contrast that with the Axis lock on the Benchmades. The Axis lock is smooth like butter. I mean, there's no comparing anything else in the world to it, but it's a complicated mechanism. Um, Ease of opening. Well, you can rotate the thumb hole. You can, if you get the knack of it, you can flick it out. Um, Certainly something with a spring-assisted opening is going to be a lot faster, though. I mean, the Kershaw Knockout, for example, with the speed-safe spring-assisted opening. I own one of those, and I love it. Um, but, again, that's not a simple no-frills design. That's got a complicated spring-assist mechanism. This is just a plain old pocket knife. There's really not all that many moving parts. Again, you've got a simple bar lock, you've got the side scales, you've got a pivot, and that's pretty much it. Um, and again, in that category, I think this is one of the best. Reasons. Well, ease of opening. Most knives have either thumb studs or a hole. I find the hole, which Spyderco seems to have popularized the use of, if not flat out originated, back in the early 90s when they emerged. I find that's really easy, especially um, I had an injury with this hand. I'm a lefty, been a lefty my whole life, but I'm a lefty who's always used the knife with his right hand. And I found it very awkward to do that afterwards. But I also found it awkward to use a knife with my left hand because I wasn't used to it. I find that knives with these thumb holes are a lot easier to use, since everything's a little awkward now, than the thumb studs. Some knives with thumb studs are better than others. Flippers are probably the easiest, but if it doesn't have a flipper or it doesn't have spring assist, then something like this I definitely find the easiest to use. Weight. These are very light. You've got FRN or fiber reinforced nylon handle scales, but you've got full metal liners inside them. They're skeletonized liners, however, so you get the best of both worlds. It's the best of both worlds, as it were. It's strong, but it's light. Versatility. You have a multi-position pocket clip on this. I see mine is rigged for tip-up lefty carry, but it could be set righty, which is actually the stock position, or for tip down here and here. And unlike the Bird Series knives, which this is my first experience with a Spyderco style knife was this one here, Spyderco Bird Meadowlark. Great knife, awesome, very similar to the Spyderco. Has actually a few advantages over this. If you look at these two knives, you can choke up on this one, but it's not really designed for it. This one actually has a finger groove there. So, I mean, actually this has some features in terms of ergonomics that the standard Delica, which it's obviously designed to be a budget version of, doesn't have. However, there's one thing that this does have, which is they over-tighten the screws. So even though it's a 4-position pocket clip, just like this, you can't get the pocket clip off, so you're stuck with the stock position. That, to me, was just not cool. And now everything else about it I love. You've got the full flat grind blade. You've got the very ergonomic handle. You know, it's completely ambidextrous because you have this hole, and then you have a centrally positioned lock. So, for example, a lot of locks, a lot of knives that are, there we go. A lot of knives that are liner locks is designed so you have to press that way. So it's really only designed for righties in mind. You can do it as a lefty, but it's kind of awkward. You're flipping the blade towards your own thumb and then having to move it out of the way. Something like this, that's not an issue. And yes, it is going sort of towards your hands, but you get into practice, and I haven't cut myself since I started doing this. I got the hang of it. Watch, now that I said that, I'll jinx myself. But even if you do have to close it like that, big one. It's definitely ambidextrous opening, and again, ambidextrous closing as well. So you have a versatile knife, a lightweight knife, but one that is still strong. It has the handle liners. And a very easy to open design. What else do you have? Well, it's extremely ergonomic once it is open. Again, it may not have the finger groove there, but you can still hold it like that. And as far as the rest of it goes, you know, these finger grooves here, some people like them, some people don't like them. I don't really look at them as finger grooves. I look at that just as another form of texturing. It's clearly not designed to match up with a particular finger. What I think it's designed to do is just allow you to exert force. If you look at, when you're holding it like this part of your hand is exerting force that way. This is pressing down. This is pressing into this part of your palm. These are pressing up. So it allows you to surround it in such a way so that you don't lose your grip. And then when you change your grip, it allows you to do the same thing. And if you look how the handle's curved here and then here, I mean, it really fits into the palm of one's hand. It's just a very good design. Another way it's a good design is that it fits in the pocket very well. You know, you have not the lowest profile clip in the world, but a fairly low profile clip. If you're not going to do what I did and use a lanyard, it actually kind of helps to have that little bit sticking out because it gives you something to grab and pull on. The clip is coated. And the finish, I've been told, does wear off over time, but that's true of pretty much all of them. It's essentially the same as the clip on the Bird series, except it's got the Spyderco logo in terms of shape. And that is a clip that I always found was a really good, effective shape. The only problem with this, of course, is that it's silver. So unless you're wearing, you know, like medieval plate armor or just silver, shiny silver pants, this is not going to be unobtrusive or you know, low key. This is, because it's black, so it just blends in. So, I mean, it's perfect. They do come in a variety of handle colors, though, which I always thought was kind of neat, especially if you're going to be using it outdoors. You don't have to worry if you drop it, you know, you're not going to be able to find it because, well, let's say if it's like red or orange or blue or something, it's going to be a lot easier to find. Which brings me to the next thing, the steel. You've got VG10 steel, which is no longer the latest or greatest, but it's better than the bargain steels like the 8CR13 MOV you get on the Bird series knives. Now, how is it better? Well, it's a little harder and it's a little more corrosion resistant. And I've heard people talk about leaving this, you know, out overnight when they're hiking in the woods or whatever and not having it rust. I used mine today once again for several hours, opening stuff and cutting stuff, and I didn't have a problem with it. Um, the blade got a little scuffed up and some adhesive from packaging tape stuck on it. I put a little water on it, wiped it off, and got a shiny blade again. And more importantly, you have a blade that hasn't lost its edge. This is still shaving sharp. I'm not going to do it, but this is still shaving sharp. And when you do have to sharpen it, it should be fairly easy to touch up, whether you use a proper sharpener or whether you use the old mug trick, um, because it's not as hard as some of the real high quality steels. I would consider VG10 from what little I know, and I'm sort of a newbie when it comes to the metallurgy of the whole thing. I would consider VG10 a high quality steel myself, but compared to like S30V or something, it's not. Um, Now, then again, the question is something like S30V a high quality steel or a super high quality steel? So in other words, is it just another level in the normal tier of where things would be considered to sit? Um, it's hard to say. For most applications, everyday applications especially, this is sufficient. Um, and so you've got the lightweight, you've got the ease of use, you've got the ease of opening. You've got the ease of closing, you've got the sturdy lock, you've got the multiple pocket positions, you have the ease of carry, you have the fact that it is very slim in addition to being light. So, yes, it does stick up a little more this way, but it's very narrow, and like I said, it's light. So, unless you get a version of one of these knives that has all stainless steel handles, anyway, it's light. But if you get the FRN of the G10, it's definitely light. Now, this is a 2.5-inch cutting edge on the blade. There are larger ones. Like I said, this is the delica4, in fact, which is the current model. The one you might remember from the movie Cliffhanger was a much larger one that was intended a little bit more of an outdoorsman's knife. That was the Endura, and that has a blade about that long, and a handle that's slightly longer as well. So, this has a blade that I would consider more appropriate for everyday carry. So, whether you're at work, whether you're in the office, whether you're in the yard, this is sufficient. If you were just picking something to carry when you went out hiking, or maybe mountain biking or something in the woods, then yeah, get the larger one, get the Endura. But for everyday carry, this is perfectly sufficient. You're not going to need it for the harder tasks you might encounter in the woods, where um, more blade presence, more blade length is going to be useful. You're not going to need that, and conversely, you're not going to have the extra unneeded blade presence that might frighten somebody who's not familiar with knives or tools. Should you take it out to, let's say, open a package at work, something like this is a lot more mundane than something with a blade like that. So, yeah. This I would consider as the perfect size. It's small enough. It's still a very functional blade, and it's light and it's handy, and it's lightness and handy. I'd say is very particular for cyclists. We have to carry gear just like everybody else, but we have to carry it under our own steam. We don't have a motor. We don't have we're pedaling down the road or down the trail. So, if you're out mountain biking, you want to be able to either throw all your stuff in your pack or put it in the pockets of your shorts or back jersey pocket, whatever. But you don't want this to weigh like it's got a ton of bricks in there. The heaviest thing you're carrying is probably going to be your water, but then maybe you've got a long sleeve jersey or a windbreaker. Maybe you've got a second pair of shades. You've got your sunglasses, and then you've got maybe clear shades for riding when it's you're really under the tree cover and there's no sun, and you want to make sure the tint isn't too dark so you don't miss like a log and hit it and go flying. The same thing when I was commuting. I had a much bigger pack, of course, than the minimalist thing you'd want to take mountain biking. But I remember when I was commuting, I had two different shades. They do come with interchangeable lenses, but I found it was easier just to get two, keep one with the light lens and one with the tinted lens. And so when I would ride into work and it would still be dark, I'd have the clear or the light tint on. And coming home, I'd have the sunglasses on. But that means, yeah, you're carrying an extra pair of sunglasses. You're carrying your water for however long you're going to be out there. You're carrying, food, whether it's just energy bars or whether it's, a picnic lunch or whatever. Um, you've got a small toolkit, even if it's just, one of those little multi-tool things, and it's probably more than that if you're going to be going into the woods. You might be carrying if you've got a frame pump or air shock on the front of your bike, you might be carrying a shock pump. So you've got all that stuff. Why carry a heavy knife, right? And the kicker is, even if you were to get the next size up, the Endura, it's similar construction, so it's going to be just as light and just as easy to use. It'll just be a little bit longer for those things you might need a knife, to be a little bit longer for if you were out in the woods. Let's say, take your pick. I was out once hiking, and not even on the bike, and the ground was all muddy where I was, and I could barely get a grip, and I kept falling and slipping. And so I took my pocket knife. It wasn't a Spyderco, but it was whatever I had at the time. And it was slightly longer, so it was probably about the length of the Endura, not the Delica that I'm holding. So it was slightly longer, but I used it to cut down a sapling about this big around and sharpen the end to a point. And I made myself sort of a walking stick, so I could stick it into the ground, so I could get out of the woods without slipping and falling, because where I was, everything was either muddy or covered with slush, or it was winter, and it was one of those weird, where it was just too warm to snow, but everything was still covered with slippery crap. Yeah, something as simple as that. Yeah, you could cut down not going to cut down a redwood, but, or an oak tree, but, yeah, if you have to cut splints, if you fall and break your arm, if you have to cut a walking stick, something simple like that. Just you're out there and you're, maybe you've got, you caught some fish and you want to cook it over a fire. Well, you're gonna, cut some sticks to put it on or something, whatever. There's all kinds of things you can use a knife for. And there's all kinds of reasons you'd have to use a knife. And, when you're out in the woods, especially, I found that things will pop up that you don't necessarily see coming. And, something breaks, you have to cut a piece of cordage to tie it onto your pack so you can carry it out of there, etc. Or you just find something in the woods that you want to haul out of there, either because it's, junk and you don't want to leave it there to mess up the woods, or because it's something that's cool. I once found a discarded wheel alongside a dirt trail. And I said, a bicycle wheel. And I said, this would be kind of cool to, take the cogs off and other stuff. And also, I didn't want to leave it there because that was just wrong. But I wasn't really going to be comfortable riding along holding a wheel in my hand. So what did I do? I cut some paracord, I tied it to my knapsack, and I rode out of there with a wheel on my back. I was able to salvage the cogs, which turned out to be like, fairly high-end, like, Shimano XT or XTR, I don't know, something like that. And as a plus, I didn't leave it there to litter the trail. So, scored some free stuff, left things a little better than I found them. That's what we do. But I wouldn't have been able to do it, at least not quite as easy, if I didn't have a blade. So, you're always going to need one. And let me put it this way. If you do need one and you don't have it, you're kind of screwed. So, in that sense, I'd say the delica4 is pretty much spot on. This is one of the best that I've ever had. And especially from the perspective of being so handy and being so light, and you don't even know it's there. Honestly, one of the reasons I put the lanyard on, it wasn't so much to be able to pull it out of my knapsack or out of the pocket of my shorts. It was so that when I took my shorts off, I could see that there was something in there. Because a lot of times I'd go to throw clothes in the wash and I would realize, wait, there's a knife in my pocket. And because it is so light, I have left light knives in my pocket and they've gone through the wash. Now, I'm here to tell you, even entry-level steels like HCR13 MOV, like you find in the Bird series, or some CRKT or Kershaw knives, I mean, they're also high-end Kushon knives too. I mean, my Kushon knockout's made here in the U.S., but anyway, that's another story. The the point is the steels that you find on lower end knives, like 8CR13 MOV or AUS 8 steel, for example, like on the Ontario Rat Model 2, um, people have said, the corrosion resistance on that isn't great. Yeah, but I had one go through the wash a couple times and came out fine. That was actually my Rat Model 2. And I just opened it up and let it dry and then wiped it off, and it was fine. Went through the washing machine. It's a clean knife now. The only thing was I had to lube the pivot a little afterwards because that obviously was all the oil was all gone. I didn't want it to start squeaking. It sounded like a real rat. But yeah, so I didn't want to accidentally put my knife through the wash. I wanted to make sure I knew whether it was there. So I mean that helps. But the whole reason I had to do that is because they are light. And it's just, I mean, there's just so many advantages to these things. If you're looking for a decent pocket knife, they are more money than others. I mean, the Bird series is cheaper. The Ontario Knife Company Rat Model 2, which I mentioned, is about the same, different shape blade, but about the same size in terms of length. It's even also a full flat grind, which is what this is. Very, very narrow, very sharp, very good for slicing. But yeah, that's going to cost you about maybe half of what this cost, or maybe a third of the price. So I mean, these normally retail for around like $60. They're not cheap. On the other hand, they're not really expensive either. If you think about it, you go out and you buy like a Benchmade, you're going to be paying $100. So you could get what, like two of these for that price, maybe. When you factor in the tax, yeah. So now again, the Benchmade has probably, it may have nicer steel. It may have, that axis lock and other things like that. But again, the axis lock is a complicated mechanism. If you're looking at just simple, basic, no frills, lockback pocket knives, the Spyderco Delica is probably one of the best you can get. And the last thing I wanted to add was the blade in terms of the grind. There are different blade options that you can get with these in terms of blade shapes and blade grinds. This tends to be the most common nowadays, but at one point a hollow ground or saber ground blade, as they called it, was a little more popular. Those had a thicker spine, but they weren't quite as thin this way for, obviously as a result. They were still pretty good at slicing, but these really slice good. And I used my Bird Series one to basically completely skin and cut apart two whole watermelons. I was taking the rinds out so I could make pickles, and that was a lot of cutting for a little blade. And I just kind of choked up on it like this, and I went through, and I was able to. I actually had a peeler, and I tried using that, and I wasn't able to. I just couldn't. It kept slipping out of my hands. So I was able to use the knife because it had that real thin, flat ground blade, and it just worked perfect. So, these definitely. Oh, and even though this one was 8CR13 MOV instead of the VG10, and this is, a inferior steel, according to what people say, this thing was still sharp afterwards. I didn't have a problem with, it being dulled. So, your mileage may vary, but yeah, that's that. And definitely the VG10 is going to hold an edge. You're going to have to sharpen it, obviously, like anything else, but it's going to be easier to sharpen than some of those really hard super steels, and it has sufficient corrosion resistance from what I've been told and from what I've experienced so far. So, these are pretty cool. If anything, I'd like to maybe get a second one. Maybe get my hands on the Spyderco Endura, the big one, or get one of these in a different handle color. One rider out.